Both my parents were computer programmers. So my mom graduated from college when I was in the 5th grade. My dad graduated when I was in the 2nd grade. And then they both worked for the military. And so they talked about coding at the dinner table. Like that was their conversation with each other. One of the earlier things to happen before the AI conversation was in 2020. I was reading the news. I love to read the news. And I had read that the head of ethics at Google was fired. And I thought, well, this is fascinating. The head of ethics was essentially fired for being too ethical. That would be my warning is if you're using ChatGPT, read it out loud after you've written it. Think about specifically the adjectives and are they really adjectives you would use? Because I know from reading ChatGPT's output and then also reading student papers that ChatGPT writes in such a way that it's very promo or like slightly over the top and uses many more adjectives than we probably use. And if you're using it, read it out loud and really think, does this sound like something I would ever say?
Welcome to the BeaverHacks Podcast. I'm your host, Tavo Konda, and today we're joined by Laurie Bridges, a librarian here at OSU, and today we're diving into a conversation about the ethics of AI and all the different topics surrounding such an important conversation in today's day and age. Just jumping right in.
Yeah.
How did you get into this conversation around AI and the different biases?
Yeah, so I guess I'll just start with a story because it goes way back in that I'm a slightly unusual person for my age in that computers have been in my life for a very long time. Both my parents were computer programmers. So my mom graduated from college when I was in the 5th grade. My dad graduated when I was in the 2nd grade. And then they both worked for the military. And so they talked about coding at the dinner table. Like that was their conversation with each other. But so even though I wasn't part of the conversation, I was just always knowing that computers and computer life changes and programming changes. And that was like a constant complaint from my mother. Like everything changes so fast. But I've always had an interest in computers, even though I work mostly with people. I like working with people. So when I was working here at the university, I used to be in the emerging technologies department within the library. So I've kind of switched back and forth between teaching and technology. And what really happened was I was at work in the library. And in the library, what happened is in social media, in our listservs around the country, people started saying that students were coming to them with books and then journal articles, and they would look for these materials and they couldn't find them, only to have students reveal, well, I got it from ChatGPT. So the librarians would then have to tell them, well, ChatGPT is not something you should be doing your research in, and it fabricates information. It fabricates very realistic sources. And so in a department meeting in the library, we were discussing who wants to look into this this issue. And I said I would look into it. So that was the spring of 2023. And on campus, really what was happening is people were beginning to have these conversations probably outside of the computer science department for the first time. And everyone who's a faculty member who teaches and is an instructor, they leave for the summer. But I spent the whole summer reading all that I could. And so by the time everyone got back at the end of the summer, word of mouth was spreading. Oh, you have questions, go ask Laurie. So then I had other faculty members on campus just coming to me and asking questions. And so then the more that I read, the more interested I became in these conversations. And as a librarian and as a library, we're interested in educating students and faculty about information, how to find information, use information, evaluate information. Now, if it's coming from generative AI, that's the information. So we need to be aware of how students are getting the information, like the hallucinated information, but also teaching them how to use it effectively. So, yeah.
I know with your background, you used to teach like a Wikipedia class, and you really tend to focus on that information stuff. I know when I took your honors class, the AI ethics class, we really touched on how can we do proper research, how can we look into the right sources, and how can we credibly verify where these things are coming from. How do you think that perspective on like actually verifying that information is legitimate has affected your perspective on AI?
That's a really good question, because I'm sure that being introduced to what ChatGPT was doing, because it was giving out what I essentially would call misinformation, made me concerned. Like, oh no, what does this mean for the future of information, that people can be so quickly convinced that this is accurate before they verify? So something I did in the beginning when I realized this was a problem is I went to ChatGPT and I said, I typed in, please write a bio for Laurie Bridges, a librarian who studies Wikipedia. And then it generated a bio with citations, because I asked for citations. And it was all made up, but it sounded really good. Like, I wish I had written articles with these titles. And then it also included real journals and real authors, people I knew, but I had never written with them. Your question is good, because it does bring to mind that I was kind of starting out with, oh no, what does this mean? And so I've always, I guess, had that in mind from the very beginning. Like, what are the things we need to be thinking about and how this can affect how people find information and what they believe to be true? So I guess I'd say starting from a place of concern.
Yeah. I mean, I know there's a lot of people who are optimistic about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what the class was about that I had with you, where, we're getting different perspectives on people who are very optimistic about it, very excited to see where it goes. But at the same time, there's a lot of concern, in all kinds of different fields. I don't think it matters where you are
mm-hmm.
to be concerned about this. How do you think it's affected, I guess, that conversation in schools? Because I know we talked a lot about just how educators are using it and kind of restricting it, but also kind of leaving it open-ended for students to decide.
Yeah. So you had asked earlier about how I became interested in the AI conversation. One of the earlier things to happen before the AI conversation was in 2020. I was reading the news. I love to read the news. And I was reading the news, and I had read that the head of ethics at Google was fired. And her name's Timnit Gebru. So I was looking up information about Timnit Gebru. And I thought, well, this is fascinating. The head of ethics was essentially fired for being too ethical. And she does study and talk about AI. So that's when I started paying more attention to the conversation. And then from there, as ChatGPT rolled out, I noticed that a lot of the folks I followed were women of color. So there's Timnit Gebru, there's Sophia Noble, there's Joy Buolamwini. So all these women are basically taking the reins of, these are things we need to think about now, rather than things we need to worry about in the future, or things to be excited about in the future. What are the things that AI really does now? And what are the concerns we have about AI now, which is what these women talk about. So within higher ed, there are some things to be excited about. But as I said, since I am focused on generative AI, since that's what's generating information and it's generating, whatever people go, they're using it as a chat box, basically. And so if people go there and students go there to find information, then my concern is they're not getting the right information. But then if you would move to the writing department on campus, their concern is, how are students using AI for writing? And is it being used in a way that helps students edit it, or are they using it in place of learning how to become better writers? So that's maybe something that the writing department is thinking about. And then another department might be thinking about the benefits of using it to code, and what are those benefits? So I think on a campus this big, you just have so many different faculty opinions about how it's being used and what it's being used for. So that could be, I think that is one of the reasons there's not a policy, is because there's no consensus among the faculty of if it's truly a great thing or not great. And then the writing professor might have a different opinion about how it can or cannot be used versus computer science professor. So there's just really a lot of different opinions on it on the campus. My concern, and something I have experienced, is even telling students about, these tools hallucinate. So double check and verify your information. And yet students still hand in sources from ChatGPT specifically. And so I've started asking students for links to the sources just so that I can verify they have clicked the link and that it is really a source. But even then, much to my surprise. But yeah, and I'll say too, like, this is kind of cute. So my niece goes to school here. She's a public health major. And then my son is 16. So at Christmas time, we were in the living room, and my son and my niece started having a conversation about Home Alone 2 versus Home Alone 1. And the conversation was about Tic Tac or M&Ms and Santa Claus and who gives them to... Is Kevin like the star of Home Alone? I think. Is his name Kevin?
Yeah.
Okay. So who gives Kevin the Tic Tacs? I think it's Tic Tacs. So they're having this debate about who gives Kevin Tic Tacs. And then one of them says, let's ask ChatGPT. To which I say, do not ask ChatGPT this question.
Just do not touch ChatGPT.
And they're like, no, we're going to ask ChatGPT. So I sat there to let them do it. And they do it. And they're like, okay, it was Home Alone, whichever one it was. And then they pulled it up and they said, okay, we're going to find it, because they wanted to see it for some reason. And they went through the film two times, 2 complete times. They're like, I don't see the Tic Tac. And I'm like, because I told you, ChatGPT is going to make up the answer and it has no idea. And so then they found it in the other one. But even, I think that's the hard part about automation bias, is people are just convinced that it's telling you the truth, even if someone tells you otherwise.
Yeah. Why do you think people kind of just assume that it is the truth? Because I know, there's that saying where it's like, don't believe everything you read on the internet. Right. But it's really easy to just believe everything that you see online and just assume that it's reality.
Yeah. So there is this term, automation bias, which speaks to that people's tendency to believe what they see from automation, whether it's machines or whatever, versus what a person tells them, or versus maybe what they see in a journal article. And I'd have to dive into the psychology of it. I'm not sure why it is, but I see it again and again. So it's obviously true. It's just quite fascinating, really. And I just got accepted to a PhD program at the University of Barcelona.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. And I'm going to be studying AI literacy. So It might be one of the things I cover in the why are they more likely to believe those things? So one thing I can tell you about is part of my interest in AI and AI literacy goes back to social media. And so you're like, what year were you born? Can I ask?
Yeah, 2004.
2004. Oh my gosh, that is the year Facebook came out.
Right. Yeah.
So in 2004, I wasn't a librarian. I was working here on campus in housing and dining. And I supervised like 12 to 16 students at a time.
Right.
And I was quite close to my students. And so they were really excited because they were telling me this new thing, Facebook, had come out. And they were waiting because it used to be just .edu. And they had heard it was spreading across the country. Like schools were being added. And they're like, oh, we're going to be added next week, Laurie. Just wait. This is so exciting. Okay. So, then the university was added and all the students went on there. And then they told me to get an account. So I went on Facebook, I got an account, and I was one of 2 employees at OSU that was on Facebook for at least a year. Only one of 2. And I didn't go very much because honestly, it was like a lot of student at party pictures. Okay. That's really what it was. So I was like, well, there's nothing for me here. But then I think it was 2006 or 2007 when it went beyond EDU. And so at that time I was now working at the library, and suddenly I started getting all these pings because other faculty and staff were joining, and then they were friending me on Facebook. And then that's when grandparents started joining Facebook. So that was an interesting time. But what happened is, because I had moved from housing and dining to the library and I knew about Facebook because I'd worked so closely with students, suddenly I was like the expert on Facebook. So I wrote a book chapter about Facebook, like should teachers be on Facebook or faculty? And then as a result of that, I got invited to be a keynote speaker at a Catholic high school in Salem and a Catholic high school in Portland. So both of them, I was the keynote speaker just talking about what is Facebook and what should teachers know about it. So I talk about that because I have some regrets about my keynote speeches. And I can look back and think of, I'm giving this keynote speech about Facebook. Afterward, the teachers had time to talk with me one-on-one to, they literally had the simplest questions, like, how do you create a group? And is there a way to be on Facebook without talking to students, and all these questions? And at the time, because I was giving these talks, I can remember what everyone's concerns were. And the concerns were about high school students, getting into trouble, or people stalking them, or, what are the negative things teens might do online? Little would I never would have thought we would be here today, where now everyone has, in my age group, has probably, well, not everyone, but almost everyone has had some type of Facebook account, and it's infecting democracies. And then there's misinformation and false information and the targeted advertising. So even though we were just talking about students, 20 years later, I see it was more of a conversation about all of society and how information is distributed and shared with one another. So even when we're talking about AI right now, whatever the things are that I think are concerning or we should be paying attention to, I can't even predict what it would be like in 20 years. And I know that based on the experience with Facebook.
That's actually an interesting perspective, because like you've already seen something similar like this, mm-hmm. For me and like all of us, this is like kind of a first time thing.
Yeah.
But we grew up with social media.
Yeah.
And, there's so many conversations surrounding like mental health and how it affects you. And then of course, political bias and stuff like that. But social media has become such an integral part of society, to the point where it's like we use it for a lot of good, but then there's also a lot of bad. Mm-hmm. And it's just kind of, I don't know, what's the best way to put it? It's just a part of life at this point.
Yeah, it's a part of life. And then, if you asked me, is social media good? Like if you were to make it some delineated,
like a blanket statement. Yeah.
Is it good or is it bad? Like it's society.
Yeah, you couldn't give like a concrete answer.
Yeah. So I think the same is true of AI. So I'm not so much pro hype or all negative. I'm just like, I don't know, but these are the things I'm concerned about. And I'm concerned about them because I watched the evolution of social media and what happened with information there. So I do think AI should be created with more people from different disciplines involved. So here at OSU, we have, I know, one philosophy professor who talks about and discusses AI, but I'd like more philosophy, more psychology, more sociology. Because as you mentioned, the mental health issues with social media, I think is going to be the same with AI because of these. Like a thing I find concerning is the making friends with ChatGPT. I don't know if you read that did you see this recent New York Times article?
No, but I've heard a lot about this. I mean, we've had a lot of conversations about this. Yeah. Like the whole idea of, like, are you talking about like
falling in love with, being friends with?
Hey, I didn't want to be the one to say it, but like, yeah, it's definitely a conversation going around. Yeah. Yeah.
So there was a New York Times article maybe last week or the week before, and it's a full-on article of a young woman who says she's in love with ChatGPT.
Oh wait, I have seen that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I mean, I know it's happening, and I don't like. I even talked to my son about it. I was like, please do not make friends with a ChatGPT. Because I don't think it's healthy in the long run, because, there's, whether there is or is not a loneliness epidemic, like being a teenager is hard. And so when you are scared or you have anxiety or you're going through a rough time, I could see where it'd be easier to turn to a ChatGPT rather than to push through and go out and meet more people and try to make more friends. So, it's happening. And I think people my age are just not aware of how much it might be happening. So I also, with the information literacy, AI literacy, is educating parents. Like, so there was this story about the young woman with ChatGPT, but there's character AI, which I've never had an account.
Oh, yeah.
So I've never had an account or anything, but I've read enough to know that there are at least two documented cases of teens dying by suicide. after a conversation with character AI.
Wow.
So that's been in the news, and I just followed as a parent, like, oh, it sounds like both parents, no, one set of the parents didn't even know that was a thing when they
like character AI itself, or just
character, that people would make friends with the AI.
Right, yeah,
like the parents had no idea. The other parents did know, and they had told their teen to like don't do that anymore. But and I'm not faulting people for doing it. I'm just wondering what the psychological effects are, and there's a lot to consider there. So that's why I would like more psychologists involved. Yeah.
I think, I don't know, in terms of like human interaction, nothing's going to beat that. Mm-hmm. And you can come close to replicating that in like the nuances of, the surface level stuff, right? Like getting to know someone. There's like the surface level things, but when you get that deeper connection with someone, there's just something that can't be explained.
Exactly.
And there's religious reasons, there's philosophical reasons as to why, psychological reasons that everyone tries to explain, but there's just something about people and human interaction that just can't be replaced by AI.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. But also, like, I can think a lot about it and then talk myself into other things, because I do, not all librarians love books, but I do love books. Yeah. And I've thought about this before. Like, I can see where for some people who love to read, it could be like reading a book.
True.
And like you really get into it, and it's never ending.
Yeah, yeah.
And when I was young, I don't think this is for your generation, but have you seen or read the Choose Your Own Adventure books?
Yeah.
So those started when I was like a little girl. Okay. So they were the thing in the 70s and 80s. So I read, and I loved them. So I could see it being like that as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, nothing beats the human connection. So having more psychologists and then more education for parents about things to think about with their kids. Because I feel like parents are, they're grappling with the social media, and then now they have this new additional, is my kid making best friends with ChatGPT? Like, it's very complicated. So thinking about character AI and how students might be using character AI or ChatGPT to maybe fill in some gaps in their social life has led me to think more about how students do or don't use AI, and what parents and faculty should know about that. And so it's one thing that's interesting is when I'm in these conversations about AI around campus, there's a lot of talk about what are students doing? And so when I read that New York Times article, I was like, what do students do that faculty and teachers and parents just don't even know? And this past week I was hosting this book club, and there was a College of Business faculty member there, and his name is Ashok. I can't remember his last name, but he was incredibly fascinating. So you might want to interview him at some point. But Ashok was saying that he is interested in doing a study on student folklore, I think is what he called it. Well, I know he used the word folklore, but I think it was student folklore about AI. So what are the things students believe or don't believe about AI, and what can be done, and what do they share with each other about how to use it and how not to use it? So that was pretty interesting.
That's an interesting conversation for sure. Touching on that with how students can use AI, I guess, how can we ensure that students are using AI appropriately? Or maybe we'll start with the student perspective, I guess. Yeah. And then we can delve into something more broad.
Like, do you hear students talking about what can I do? Or are they just doing it?
What do you mean?
How can I use AI? Do students talk about that? Like, do they talk about what their professors or teachers tell them?
Oh, I mean, I feel like students just kind of use it.
Yeah, that's what I
thought. There's not really a conversation of, is this the right thing to do?
The hard thing because again, I'm more about generative AI, and I do use it for writing. Like, I use it in such a way that if I'm writing something, I mean, I've been writing for so long that I know how my brain works when I'm writing. And sometimes I'll just get stuck on like one sentence, and I can obsess about this sentence, and it will just derail all my writing. So I'm like, this one sentence isn't right. But now I can just go to ChatGPT or Copilot, and I'll just put in the sentence, and then I'll say, please rewrite this sentence, or give me some ideas, or this is the sentence I have, but this is what I'm thinking about. Help me create a new, like, it does great with that. I do appreciate that. But what I think students aren't really aware of is that when you're an instructor, a professor, or a teacher, and students don't really know their own writing yet, that when they use ChatGPT too heavily, it really doesn't sound like them. And then you start reading things and they sound all quite similar. So that would be my warning is if you're using ChatGPT, read it out loud after you've written it. Think about specifically the adjectives. And are they really adjectives you would use? Because I know from reading ChatGPT's output and then also reading student papers that ChatGPT writes in such a way that it's very promo, I guess, or like slightly over the top and uses many more adjectives than we probably use and really like, I guess, over the top adjectives. So if you're using it, read it out loud and then really think, does this sound like something I would ever say? Maybe I shouldn't even say ever. Like, is this something I would commonly say? Because maybe at some point you would say it like that. But so the writing can be, it's not even, the problem to me isn't the formulaicness, it's the over the topness.
Right. I think, I feel like ChatGPT adds a lot of adjectives.
It does.
Like it really over describes stuff to a certain degree. So
as I mentioned that example earlier of when ChatGPT first came out and I asked it to write a bio about me. And the nice thing about having it write a bio about you is you can instantly, it gives us such a good example of how it's making things up. However, so I try this little exercise with every AI when someone shares it. So, DeepSeek came out last week. And then a coworker sent me Perplexity using the I don't know, but it was Perplexity via DeepSeek. And he shared it with me. So I did this exercise again. And it was the best bio I've seen. It was all accurate. Each sentence had a little number after it, so I could click on it. And you could click on it and see what its source is. But of course, it was about me, so I knew it was true. But what I noticed is the language wasn't as over the top as ChatGPT. It was much more basic and it sounded real, like something I would really say. So that made me start thinking this week about maybe it's in its coding or programming or the guardrails or whatever that makes ChatGPT so over the top. And maybe there are other AI tools that will come out that won't be that same way. So this is just something I've been thinking about, how maybe each AI, generative AI tool could write slightly differently. And I know you can train them. I mean, like in ChatGPT, if you have a subscription, you could tell it, it's supposed to learn from how you do things. But I haven't really worked with that much. So maybe it's possible to do it in that way as well. But that's my main concern is students aren't learning their own writing voice, or when they're using ChatGPT, they're not reading through it to see, like, is this really something I would say?
I think to a certain degree, it will get better. Mm-hmm. And even if it is perfect at replicating your writing voice, I think the issue still remains where it's like, if you don't know how to write in the first place, it's not going to work.
Right.
Because like for someone like you, for example, you've got like a specific writing style, mm-hmm. and you have to input that in the first place for it to even replicate that.
Right.
But if you don't have a writing style and you're just like, write this essay for me. That's a very good
point. That's a good point.
It's over, yeah.
Right. Like, what's it going to learn from your writing if you're not you're any good at it? That's a really good point.
I do think for even people like you and maybe me, like it could make us more lazy.
Yeah.
That could definitely be something.
Well, and then there's one of the great philosophers, Plato or Socrates, I cannot remember which one, because historical philosophy isn't really something I'm expert in. But one of them thought that writing was terrible. People should not write and should not learn how to write, because at that time it was about oral tradition and the ability to have an oral debate. So the belief for the philosopher was, if people start writing, they're going to stop thinking. And then it becomes permanent when you write. So if you write something, it becomes permanent. It's not an ongoing argument or conversation.
Right.
So I just read this like within the past decade. But it has profoundly made me think more about what does writing do, good and bad. And I do love to write and I love to read books. But what does it do good and bad? And then thinking about AI, how might AI and the way it writes homogenize the way the rest of us write? Like it will eventually influence how we all write and the words we probably use in real life. So if it's over the top adjectives, like maybe in 10 years, we will all be talking and we'll all be using over the top adjectives because we've learned from what we're reading.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of an interesting.
I think that's a really nice segue into this contrarian point of view, that because we've talked a lot about how AI can make you more lazy and all that stuff, but it can also elevate your workflow significantly. Yeah. We touched on this at the beginning with coding and stuff. I guess we can start with writing. Yeah, like if you're already super good at writing, you already have a really nice workflow, it can really speed up the process, and just that ideation phase
right
just is completely out the window. Like you don't have to spend as much time. Something that might take a day to come up with might just take an hour, maybe less.
Yeah, like when I said I put in like one sentence at a time.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to discount that, because when I get stuck on a sentence, like it may just interrupt the whole thing and I can't even think for a couple days. Yeah. So to get through that little quagmire in 5 minutes really speeds up the whole process.
Exactly.
And it's just one sentence, but it's an important sentence that was a hang up for me earlier.
And in the coding space especially, I know if you already have a basic foundation in coding, it can really elevate your workflow to the point where you're almost like a superhuman coder. Like it just, and that's the thing about hackathons, right? Hackathons are like, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but they're, so I'll give you the,
I want to know about hackathons.
So hackathons are coding competitions where you can come together to build a project of some kind. So this can be something, you know, you're interested in, passionate about, or it can be, you know, a startup idea. Really, sky's the limit. Any project you want to come up with, and you can use some kind of coding technology to make it. So whether that's like web development, like a website or a mobile device, I've had people make like hardware devices, really anything. Yeah. So, but the interesting catch is that it's only like 24 to 48 hours. So it's like a really short time frame. So you don't have like much time to do this, and you got to code this. All in the same room? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So at most hackathons, it's like, maybe, I know ours is going to have like hundreds of people.
And food?
Yeah.
Like you give them dinner, breakfast?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So you just give them food and whatever they need, and then they're just in a room 24 hours coding nonstop.
Okay.
And they like get into it. And when you're in these hackathons, it's so crucial to have all the tools that you can to just quickly get something out like as fast as you can. And AI has been really, really helpful in getting people that elevator workflow where they're just locked in. They know how to do it. They know exactly how to do that. But something that might take them maybe a week, they can get done in a day. And I feel like that's really what's elevating hackathons at this point. And that's kind of why this conversation is so important as well.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds like a cool event. Now I see why you like it so much.
Oh, yeah. You know?
But do they talk to each other while they're coding?
Yeah. So you can do it either by yourself, or you can do it. Most hackathons restricted to like 4 people in a team, but yeah. So ours will definitely have BeaverHacks 2025, April 4th to 6th. Me and Kayla were talking about this. I was like, out of our conversation, throughout the entire conversation, I have to plug it at least one time. So there it is. There's the plug.
That's awesome. So yeah, I mean, the ways that I think AI for writing elevates what folks do are many. And the best example I really have is for second language learners. Right. I shouldn't say second language. I should say English language learners. And a few years ago, I wrote an article, like a thought piece, if you will, about English hegemony in the research world. And what is the burden on professors and researchers outside of the English speaking world to write in English. And I mean, the burden is huge. That's basically what everyone has to publish in now. So even these professors who might be 50 or 60, maybe they didn't learn English as part of their schooling or high school, but now they've got to publish in English. And editors in North America can be rather judgmental about English language learner writing because they want some type of perfect journal article. But a perfect example I have is people that I know in Spain. I know professors there because I work with them. And one of the professors told me that ChatGPT has been amazing for her work because at their university, they employ many translators because the translators have to help all these faculty who speak Spanish and Catalan as their first language to get published in English. And so you could write in your native language and then have it translated, or you could, and that's going to take longer, or if you do know English and you can write in English, you can write in English, but then they still have to often use a translator or an editor to help polish it so it doesn't sound or read like a English language learner. So what she told me she does is she will write it in the English she knows because she's a very good English speaker and writer. But when she would previously submit it to journals, it would be rejected and they would say, it would be a comment about the writing. And so she says she put in paragraph by paragraph into ChatGPT her own English writing and say, I'm going to tell you exactly what she says. She says, make this more academic.
Oh.
And then she says, it'll come back and she knows English well enough to say, yeah, I think that's good. And then she moves on to the next paragraph. So she doesn't put in the whole paper. She puts it in paragraph by paragraph.
Yeah.
And I think it's a huge burden for people who don't speak English as their first language, especially outside, and they have to publish and research. So that's also why you hear a lot about, well, maybe you haven't heard, but there's a lot of articles or noise about what will this do to translators and their jobs. We don't really have translators. Like at this university, I don't know anyone that's a translator, but at universities abroad, they have many, many translators. So it could affect that, but I understand where it can help people's writing immensely. And then there's editing houses and publishers that are saying people need to say when they use AI. But it's so arduous that I don't think people are really going to do it. They're just probably going to use AI and then just not say so. But one thing I shared in our class, I think I did, was the scandal in Japan this past year about the winner of the top literary prize in Japan. After she won the award, she said she used AI to help her write the book. And then a big scandal erupted about, oh my gosh, we've given an award to someone who used AI to write the book. And I don't speak Japanese nor read it. So I had to, and there wasn't a lot of info coming out, but it was so fascinating to me that I was trying to translate all these articles to see what the deal was. And in the end, she then said, well, I only used AI to write the things that the AI said. So apparently her book had an AI character. And everything the AI character said was written by AI in the book. So it was a sci-fi book, I guess.
Oh, everything the character in the book said.
That was the character in the book was AI.
Oh, okay.
And so she used AI
to write the AI characters.
Said. Okay. Yes.
Okay.
That's what she said.
I feel like that's
legit.
Well, yeah.
But even then, I mean.
Yeah. I guess if it's being entered into a contest.
But it's a complicated question. Like, what do we think of books that are written partially by AI if they're award winning?
Ooh, that's definitely a question. Yeah. Because on one hand, I feel like artists and writers take a lot of inspiration from other pieces of work.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's something that you have to input into it.
Right.
So maybe AI kind of streamlines that process where it's like it's already gathering data from other people, and then you're able to kind of take that and turn it into something of your own. But I don't know, it's a slippery slope, I feel like.
Since we're in the studio and I have this speaker, now I'm thinking about like musicians who write music. Like, are they using AI?
Is there anything?
that they've admitted it?
Yeah, true. Depends on admitting it, yeah. I know, like, there was that one, like, Coca-Cola ad that was made with AI.
I didn't know that.
Like, generated using AI, yeah. I don't know.
I haven't seen that. But I have tested out ChatGPT on poetry. Like, I gave it a lot of direction. Yeah. And it did really good.
Oh, okay.
So then that made me a little sad.
Yeah. Like, AI poetry could get better than human poetry. I feel like in the conversation of AI replacing humans, in terms of like jobs, there's a lot of people who are scared that, like, I know you mentioned like the jobs of translators. I think the consensus that I've come to based on what I've heard is if you're competent enough, you'll know how to use AI to the point where you won't get replaced. But if you're in like a stagnant place in your job and you're kind of just going along, and you're not doing anything like innovative or revolutionary, then AI is going to replace you. But if you're competent enough to like know how to use it to elevate what you're already doing, so whether that's coding or writing, or even translating, if you can find a way to use AI to elevate what you're already doing, you're not going to get replaced.
Yeah, I think that it's hard to look into the future, but I have been reading what folks in industry say about AI replacing people. And one thing I've been reading is comments about the future will need more people who are good at the soft skills. And so, for example, if you're going to be a computer programmer, is it that you, and I say this as people, as I said, I have parents who are computer programmers. Or is it that you like programming by yourself? Both my parents are really introverted. And then, or are you going to be a computer programmer who's really good with people and bringing people together and like coordinating a work group? And so I think there's going to be more emphasis on people skills, ironically, when people start going more toward AI to have conversations and whatnot. I don't, it's hard to say what the future will hold. Like whoever would have thought there would be social media managers. So. Right.
Yeah. So the rise of social media actually kind of ties back into this again, where it's like social media is such a crucial part of a lot of businesses now.
Right.
Like if you don't have social media, like you're missing out on a huge chunk of that marketing process.
Right.
I know, like what we're doing here, it's all social media because we know that getting the, I guess, publicity and the eyes from people who aren't at OSU, we can get more people to come to our event if we promote on social media.
Exactly. So when, as I said, I was in housing and dining when Facebook came out, and I was one of 2 professors on there. And then suddenly, we had at the time we had resident directors who were graduate students. So I think currently they're all full time, but back then they were students. So they were among the young people on Facebook. And the head of housing and dining at the time, I recall that he called this meeting with the upper level staff. And he said, everyone must cease and desist Facebook now. We're not going to use social media. And frankly, I just ignored that, but I was just like, what? But that speaks to not knowing what was, like, he didn't want us advertising there, nothing.
Right.
And that just speaks to who knows what's to come.
Yeah.
But I'm personally not worried because I've seen things change before, and I think it will just result in other areas of need. And because I have changed professions a few times, I'm quite flexible in that way. And so I do think it'll require maybe more flexibility. My parents, my grandparents, they were in a time period where it was thought to be best to get your job and then have that same job with the same company. That is not true anymore.
100%.
And so thinking constantly about, what do I enjoy and what am I good at in my current job, and this is how I think. And then if something were to happen, what are the other things that I could kind of segue into or do a little bit differently? So, for me, myself, like when I was working in housing and dining and doing marketing, the reason I just love books, but even though as a librarian, I don't really work with books at all, but I also love research and information. And when I was doing marketing, a lot of marketing is research. So I just kept like, this is the part of the job I really like. So this is what I really want to do. And I can see there's this other need for it out there. So I think always just kind of being aware and working on those skills that are more sought after or make you happier that you can move to a different location. So, like with you and your computer science and then this whole gig here, like who knows where it will lead, but it gives you more skills outside of the one, discipline. So I think that's important, just keeping your options open and learning new things.
For sure. I guess on that note, what advice would you have for students who, at this point in time, a lot of undergrads, they're not really sure what they want to do. They're not sure if they want to commit to a job that they have to spend the rest of their lives doing. What would you say to those students?
There are many adults who would have people outside of school that would have different opinions than me. But for me, I have an English degree. That was my first degree. And people, when I was getting the English degree, are like, what are you going to do with that? And it was coupled with education because my parents made me do it. They were like, you're going to be a high school teacher. And then I got to the high school teaching and I was like, oh no, I don't like this at all. I mean, being in front of a class all day long is not for me. So in that way, what I would recommend for young people is get the degree that interests you most. Because in the current day and age, you're just going to have to continually learn. And a lot of people then go to grad school or they learn on the job, and then you kind of figure out more and more. So I do think it's hard, especially when the job market's changing and you're young and you're in your 20s, to know what you're going to like when you're 40. So it's not a failure to change careers or move. It's just an evolution and being flexible and kind of discovering who you are and what you love to do on a daily basis. And that's a privilege. I mean, I realize a lot of people don't have the privilege to think about and then kind of move around and choose what they want to do. But when you're here at OSU and you feel the pressure to pick a major, and then you feel, oh my gosh, have I picked the right one for the rest of my life? I have more degrees than the average person. So nonetheless, that's just because I like school. But I have seen other people and family members and others like move around without getting the extra degrees by just focusing on their strengths and then, moving to a new location or putting more emphasis on this other strength. So just being open to continually learning, and that changing your mind isn't failure. It's just growing and learning who you are and what the job market is looking for.
Some very wise words. Wrapping up here, do you have anything you want to promote or plug?
Let's see. I taught the honors, generative artificial, what was my class called?
AI ethics, right?
No, it's called generative artificial Gen AI and society. That's what my class is called.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Gen AI and society. And I will be teaching that same honors class again in the spring and in the fall.
Awesome.
So it's a 1-credit class. It won't be exactly the same every time, but the class is not about, and you took the class is not about answers. The class is more about questions. What are the questions we should be thinking about and all of these many things happening? And how are they going to affect different jobs or your life? And so when we talk at the university, we often talk about how are students using AI to write their papers or to code or whatever. But there are much bigger questions, as we talked about, with making friends with ChatGPT or with surveillance software or needing more diversity on the training data. So we just discuss all the many, many things that are affected by AI.
And as someone who's taken the class before, I highly recommend it. It's a good time. So yeah, be sure to check that out, guys. Anything else or?
No, I think that's about it.
Okay. Well,
and I should say we do. Because I am a librarian.
Right. Yes.
There is at the library website. If you go to the research button and then you scroll down, you'll see there are library guides. And I have a library guide about ethical AI.
Yes.
And in that guide is books as I'm collecting them for the library. So I have a list of current books about ethical AI.
Definitely be sure to go check that out, guys. It's a good read.
Oh, yeah. I had the class look at it.
Yeah. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Laurie Bridges.
Thanks, Abel.